Welcome to the new episode of Startup Strides. Today, my guest is Hannah Madan. She's a co-founder of Prima Mente. It's a very exciting company. I have a lot of questions to go through, but before we start anything, welcome, Hannah.
Amazing. Thanks, Javid, for having me. I actually don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, even though you asked me
Perfect
beforehand. So
pronunciation. Don't worry.
amazing.
Hannah, you guys are building a very exciting company. I mean, I think this might be one of my longest list of questions I've
Hmm.
prepared. And it's purely because how exciting this company is and how it's kind of really innovative approach you guys are taking. And but before we start with the question about the company and what you guys are building, I'm really curious about you and your background before Prima Mente. The what shaped you, the path you took prior to co-founding this company.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things have happened in my life, but I was reflecting on this question. I think it's really about seeing people enjoy what they're doing, basically, is like one of the biggest themes for me. And that's either through playing sport. I played a lot of sport growing up. My family is super sporty, but also um, like proud of people when they do things that they were really like enjoyed. And it used to be something that I would get teary about, and I still do when people are like really happy with things that have happened. And I get curious about how people end up in different roles and situations that give them different amounts of joy, I guess. So that was like some of the things I've been reflecting on. But yeah, personally, I just spent a lot of time in startups. I'm very biased. So since 2017, I've been working in and out of early stage companies in the UK. And that's really been the shaped me up until this point of founding a company myself. So yeah, bit of sports, bit of just getting shit done in startups. That's kind of my current background so far.
Fair enough. I know you've done PhD
Yeah.
and you have a quite scientific background. And I'm curious, like, at what point was there like any formative experiences? It could be research moments, it could be mentors or failures that nudge you towards translating the science through startups rather than staying purely in academia.
Yeah, I mean, I took the PhD route because I think there was only 18 people on my pharmacology degree, and most of us went to do a PhD, largely because we spent a lot of time doing research in our degree, so it made a lot of sense. I basically almost didn't get a PhD position, so I am the kind of an example of always being second place, but someone dropped out. I got a PhD, so there I was in it. Couldn't say no. Um, so yeah, throughout that time, I mean, I think the main formative things were just the day I learned that um, journals have like a 70% profit margin. That really pissed me off. I think I was like, I don't know if it's true today, but I think that was one thing I learned, was just seeing academics obviously publishing, also reviewing papers, doing a lot of work for journals, and then me thinking that's not something I want to spend my time doing, and trying to um, fight for all of that very limited amount of money, and then having to still go super slowly in academia. So those were the kind of things that unsettled me, made me unhappy, and didn't fit with my, I guess, what I mentioned earlier about having fun, spending time doing things I wanted to do and that were bringing me joy. So that was one of the big, I don't know whether it's a formative experience, but it's definitely a piece of information that changed my view. And the second piece is more, my PhD was in the link between diabetes and bowel cancer. I was studying two whole diseases basically, and that was a lot of things to learn. But the thing I enjoyed the most was speaking to clinicians and patients and saying there's a potential link between diabetes, which could lead to bowel cancer, and not many people knowing about that. So I realized it was more important to focus on translating specific bits of information that we could help people instead of just researching it in the lab and not sharing it.
Fair enough. I want to bring the conversation towards Prima Mente because it's really exciting company and I have a lot of questions about that. But I want to ask a very quick follow-up question about the PhD stuff. I feel like
Mm.
all students, they like science, they end up studying science and they're like, okay, natural progression is a PhD. What advice would you give to those students who are in their undergrads perhaps and they're, they don't know what they want to do and they're like, okay, next natural step would be in PhD. Major things they need to consider before pursuing that.
Yeah, so I think that PhDs are super useful if you want to stay in that field. Or if you want to stay in the research side of things or the scientific side of things, I would do it with a lab that is as successful as it can be in the academic world. So with really good references, I guess, from past PhD students that have gone through there that haven't ended up, well, tainted, I guess, by the PhD experience. So those are things that I would consider basically a really good scrutiny of exactly where you're going to do your PhD. Is it worth those 3.5 years, 4 years, 5 years sometimes of hard work? But it does teach you a lot of things about independent research, and especially if you're surrounded by a lot of great people in your lab, you will learn a lot of things and understand what you like doing and don't like doing. As with anything that you actually choose to do, you always learn something. So as long as you're reflecting along the way, I think that's the most important thing. But yeah, I think there's a lot of other opportunities, especially I would encourage everyone to try and build something of their own, if it's just a community or something else as well that could be on the smaller scale, just to get hands-on feel for doing a lot of different things. I think early on in your career, you should always say yes to many more things. And then later on, you become a bit more refined with what you say yes and what you say no to.
True, very true. And so all these experiences led you to Prima Mente.
Mhm.
And I guess for those unfamiliar, can you perhaps give us like a nice overview of what you guys are building? And I believe you guys have also a model called Pleiades, if I'm not mispronouncing it.
That's right.
Yeah, just go ahead and tell us a bit about all those things.
Yeah. So I think what we are in right now, which I think we're going to dive into in a bit more detail, is this huge opportunity around using AI for scientific discovery and understanding molecular mechanisms in biology. And that's the kind of AI for science world that we're living in Prima Mente. We're building like a suite of models essentially that will lead to the development and understanding of new targets for neurodegenerative conditions and basically transform the care for neuro patients in the future. But fundamentally, our kind of first principles thing that we're trying to solve is understanding how the brain works at a cellular and molecular level. The first model you mentioned, Pleiades, that we've generated is understanding epigenetic biology, which is key for cell state and the molecular dynamics between cells, and especially we think really important to understand what's happening in the brain, because neuro conditions are things like dementia and Alzheimer's. They are, you could say, a chronic disease. They happen over decades of time. And there's going to be many, many changes in cell states that create the ultimate end disease state. But that disease state is also always shifting. So Pleiades is our first kind of suite of models made from scratch in-house for epigenetic disease biology applied to the task of diagnosing Alzheimer's. So we're always focused on how we can impact patients the most. But ultimately, what we're building here is a suite of models that can understand different layers of biology so that we can transform care for patients, basically.
What was a non-obvious truth about brain health that, or just brain itself really, made you feel like there was a company to be built here?
I think the brain is super hard to study, so I don't think there's any obvious truths actually in this
Fair enough.
sector. But it's felt like we were constantly seeing the trials that patients were in for new drugs in things like Alzheimer's failing. We've seen one actually last week with a GLP-1
GLP.
drug that didn't work out. Right. So it's either that the patient population selected for these trials are not, they don't have the right biology that we're looking to target, or the drugs that we're developing are targeting the wrong kinds of biology. So it's really coming back to the fact that I think the field have forgotten about that kind of first principles approach. What molecular changes are actually happening and what should we really be targeting? Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
the kind of need to a better way to characterize disease in patients, basically, these biomarkers and targets that we're looking at. Were, yeah, still to be uncovered, I guess. Lots of hidden things in the brain that we need to find out about.
But has that model of sort of neurodegeneration or brain health evolved since founding Prima Mente for you personally?
Well, I came from outside of the brain field, so I'm learning stuff every day.
Fair enough.
And we just doubled our wet lab team as well. So we're getting in a lot more samples, a lot more understanding to be generated in our kind of company. So yeah, I'm sure stay tuned for more of that kind of news, basically.
Fair enough. Prima Mente is going after a massive, I mean, as you said, brain is such a uncharted, unexplored territory. There's so many ways to go about it. But I'm curious, what's like this one true North Star that's guiding Prima Mente? Is it the early detection? Is it the eventual intervention, or just a deeper systems level understanding of the brain?
Yeah, so I think we are founded by two clinicians. So it's always about better patient outcomes for us and shifting the conversation actually from diagnosing disease to prognosis, which means like a more granular understanding of your risk, your type of disease that you have, and the options to keep your brain healthy. So that's the kind of North Star, is that patients live longer. We don't have to have as much care support around them, so other people can have their freedom back and enjoy the time in their life. So the North Star is really uncovering that biology to create biomarkers and targets of the disease that we should be focusing on.
The epigenome is, you guys are going also after epigenome, which you just mentioned, right? And it seems like it's such a dynamic, you know it better than I do, but it's very dynamic, it's very contextual and cell type specific. What convinced you guys that a foundational model approach could capture something this complex?
I think it was a crazy idea in the beginning. Lots of people didn't believe us. I think Ravi and Puya, who was our first kind of technical machine learning hire, were excited to experiment with this. Basically, we'd seen that models like ChatGPT, as they get bigger and bigger, they get more effective at the tasks that they're trying to accomplish. And we thought that same basic kind of scaling law, does that apply in biology, basically? So we created our own models in-house that are inspired by those models and just tried it out, really. It was a very much 2 years ago when this wasn't sexy or cool. I know last week the United States even have this Genesis mission where lots of money is going into this kind of stuff. But it was really a stab in the dark at that point, and a kind of intuition that sequence-based data works well in transformer architecture, and the biology that we have, the epigenome, is sequence-based. So that was the clues that we had that this might work.
There, you kind of answered my next question, which was about what was the thinking behind use of the architecture choices, the Y transformers. So it's because of the sequence space. Is there
Yeah,
another reason, or is just mostly that?
that was the initial hypothesis. The technical hypothesis of the company was transformers work well on sequence-based things. Therefore, biology could apply here. Yeah.
And you mentioned something about scaling laws in
Mm.
LLMs. Does that kind of biological scaling laws apply also brain to your model?
Yeah, so our Pleiades models are 90 million parameters, 600 million, and 7 billion parameters. And as they scale in number of parameters, the model gets more and more accurate tasks. So we think that we have shown that scaling laws apply here. We would love to be, well, we soon will be operating in the more larger, huger numbers of parameters as well. So 80 billion is kind of our next step up. So we'll prove that again, hopefully. But yeah, it seems to be the case that it's working in that way.
That's really cool. I guess zooming out, what macro forces, matter most for the progress of this field? Is it the compute scaling? Is it the cost of data generation, or breakthroughs in wet lab automation?
Yeah, so I was curious about your question because I think it's really interesting. So like, if we had, let's take the wet lab automation first. So this is something we are applying. We have robots in the lab. It really helps to reduce batch effect and any noise that we have in our data, which is super helpful for the models. Although we want our models to also understand noise, because ultimately we want to be serving patients in different parts of the world. So the process is going to be similar, but from slightly different places in the world, different instruments that are being used, etc. So we need a model to understand that. But when we're doing our initial research, we want to avoid that as much as possible. So we do already use, robots, and we're thinking heavily about automation. However, this alone does not kind of like unblock everything. If we generate more clean data, we still need compute to be able to process it and to be able to run our models. So that goes back to the compute side, and also the kind of the cost of data generation. It'd be great to have unlimited capital here as well, right? We could do a lot with the existing samples that we have, but one of the reasons why our company exists is because we think that the data that is out there right now isn't the right kinds of data, or we're not looking in the right kinds of places. So I twist your question and say, what if we had to reduce the cost of data generation, it would be on the new methods that we're developing in the lab as well, and kind of reducing that down. So that's one of the things to tweak there for us. And that again goes back to, that would go through automation and then into the compute world. So I think the real blocker is always compute right now. As the models are getting bigger, compute is still expensive, right? We're waiting for that time where it drops down. But I think compute scaling is probably the biggest thing to understand where it might plateau off. I don't think we've seen that yet. So we're really excited to move things on all of those things that you mentioned. But I think the compute side is probably the biggest macro factor here. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to tie this to my other question, because I feel like what you said is really interesting. So in practice, the foundation models that you guys are building, do they themselves become the competitive mode, or do relationships to proprietary data and clinical validation still matter more in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, so we see a huge amount of opportunities for our models to be used in the field. So Pleiades is the best epigenetic foundation model, and we think it has many applications, not just in neuro, but across lots of other diseases. So with our kind of growing capabilities in AI biology space in our team and our kind of unfolding suite of models, we will be going forwards with embedding forward deployed scientists in organizations that have lots of data and do want to uncover novel biology in their own data sets. Because we think there's a lot of hidden things there. We know from meeting people in the field that there's a lot of data that's been generated that needs that compute to unlock it. And we have those partnerships that can help us do that. So I think there's that external bit, and then internally we focus on developing and using our models for biomarkers and new targets for neuro diseases. And this is already in partnership with healthcare systems like the NHS, where we're running a study to evaluate the use of Pleiades and future models in patients who are just getting diagnosed. And as well as talking to pharma companies who want a long-term relationship with us where we could develop targets together. These are all things we're exploring in the next kind of 3 to 6 months. So it's an exciting time to see what sticks and what is most valuable for us.
So essentially, it's not just like one thing; it's the whole. It's kind of like the full stack, right? It's the part, it's the data, it's this clinical trials eventually, and that's really cool. And I'm curious, how has been the reception towards Prima Mente from clinicians, from scientists in the field? You guys just said you're partnering with NHS too, so I'm curious, like what's the overall reaction or reception towards it?
Yeah, I think everybody's super keen to improve the care pathway for dementia, especially in the UK, with it being the number one cause of death actually since 2017. So it's been a long unmet need for a long, long time. So everyone is very excited about that. And we surround ourselves by people who are enthusiastic about what we're doing as well. So it's probably a little bit of bias towards that, but we have been able to roll out a study across 15 sites and probably more in the UK, in Wales, and also Scotland in the NHS. So that's really exciting. That shows real excitement for what we're doing. And then we have ongoing conversations with other kinds of people with huge sample sets, or people who generate data daily in their labs or as part of their companies. So there's a lot of excitement. I think you would have seen as well recently, like Anthropic and Google, DeepMind obviously have been in here for ages, but people like Anthropic and OpenAI are starting AI for science companies, or like sections of their companies. So there's a lot more hype and excitement in this space.
So from what I'm feeling, or from what you're saying, is that building in the UK hasn't really been a massive challenge and stuff. It's actually been pretty good so far, no?
Yeah, so our company is split actually across San Francisco and London. So we have loved growing in London first, basically, for the last 2.5 years. That's where we've been. We had a lot of good connections to academics and the NHS. So it's been wonderful. But yeah, we're exploring San Francisco now. There's more and more of our team are based out there. Someone will start in Dubai soon. So
Bye.
there's lots more opportunities around the world that we would love to be a part of.
Wow, that's really cool. One thing with deep tech companies, they're always so cool, and they're going after such interesting and actually
Mm.
necessary things. But I feel like sometimes we see issues with commercialization eventually, finding the right kind of the product market fit, etc.
Yeah.
What kind of pathway do you see unfolding for Prima Mente? Would that be, selling the models or selling biomarkers, running assays, or co-developing drugs with pharma? I mean, obviously you don't have to disclose anything confidential, but I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts?
So yeah, we're in this phase where we're exploring a lot of opportunities commercially with the things I mentioned earlier. So deploying members of our team into other companies that are doing research maybe in areas like cancer or something like this, where they can use our models already. So that will be a period of experimentation for next year. We're exploring partnerships with pharma companies who want to develop drugs or targets specifically for neuro conditions like the ones we're focused on, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Those are all things that are on the table at the minute. We do know that we need to have a path to revenue, right? So it's just about figuring out the puzzle pieces along the way to do that.
You mentioned that you're already partnered with several organizations. In these early stages, what makes an ideal partner for a company like Prima Mente?
Yeah. We are always happy to hear from anybody who's interested in what we're doing. But the most important or the most exciting things we have in terms of partners are people with biological questions they want to answer, people who have a lot of multi-omic data that they may not have the compute or may not have the lab facilities to evaluate. It really has been wonderful to work with clinicians and academics around the world who have cohorts of patients that they've done some analysis on, maybe a few protein biomarkers, but they would love to know a bit more about the epigenetic biology, etc. So it really works well when we partner up because we're able to share back all of that information and we can go on and help patients uncover better options for them, basically. So that's been one really successful way of doing it in the first instance. And now, yeah, we're looking for more people like that who have or are curious about what we're building, basically.
You mentioned that there's a strong focus on Parkinson's and Alzheimer's as sort of core indications that right now you guys are focusing on. Do you guys want to expand into other indications as well eventually, or is this going to be what's like you guys really want to get better at?
Yeah, we are focused on Alzheimer's, Parkinson's at the minute, and other neuro conditions, but we see opportunities in the future. It really depends on how fast we're able to execute in this space. I think there's lots of stuff still to be done here for now for us, but then supporting the wider community in other areas of research, actually.
I feel like obviously we talked about the science and we talked about the business, uh, but now I'm curious more behind the scenes aspects of it. When you're actually building the company, you have to, especially for a company like this, you need VC fundraising
Mm.
and funding. And I'm wondering, we talked about the ideal partner in terms of like who you work with, but also in terms of partnership with VCs, what an ideal VC or VC capital kind of looks like for you. Would that be a deep tech investor? Would that be a biotech VC? Would that be a more generalist VC? And what kind of misunderstandings or like, misconceptions do you tend to come across with investors about your company?
Yeah, so Ravi, my co-founder, actually absolutely takes the lead in this space on our side. So he's got all the interesting insight. But what he tells me is it's always, obviously, when you're raising for a company, you want investors who believe in the world you're trying to create. And misunderstanding is probably the wrong word. I know that Ravi does a very, very good job of telling the story about Prima Mente and what we're building. But we have a few kind of, I guess, things about our context that sometimes people don't align with. So, for example, me and Ravi are not from, we don't come out of big AI labs, we don't have technical backgrounds. So, fundraising for us in the very beginning was super hard because nobody believed that it was, yeah, we knew what we were doing, I guess, in the space until we could prove it. So now we have some of that evidence, is much, much easier to do that. But the next thing that we come across is that, as you alluded to a little bit, but it's probably not obvious to a lot of people, we do have quite a full stack approach where we run our own clinical studies that gets samples into our own lab, we generate our own data, we build our own models, and then we deploy them into really interesting organizations and for clinical applications. And then we can use our lab again to uncover further what the biology really is that we should be targeting. So we are that kind of full stack approach, and we do feel like going after both biomarkers and targets at the same time is the most effective in the neurospace. And not everyone believes that we should be doing all of those things all at once. So I think that's the biggest thing that we come across, is just making sure we align with investors that will support us to spend a lot of time evaluating our foundation model approach. Scaling them, as we talked about already, is very expensive.
Sure.
And if we don't do this fast, we're not going to win in the space. So we need someone to really back us in that way.
Well, what's funny is I was actually talking recently to somebody, and they were telling me, until now, it seemed like there was a strong focus on point solutions, and point solutions tend to be quite successful if you manage to execute well. But now the defensibility, it seems to be coming from having that full stack approach. And I think in the long run, you guys might actually win because of the approach you guys are taking. One thing I'm curious about, if there are deep tech founders in your spot, or I guess in the early stages of founding a startup, and they're also going after something very innovative, very kind of, what's the right word for it? Like something very cool, very interesting.
Yeah.
What would you advise to them in terms of how they should approach this fundraising and presenting their idea to, looking back at the lessons you've learned yourself throughout this time? What would you advise to them?
I mean, I think constantly it's always about the story that you tell, the future that you're trying to create. It has to be big, has to be exciting. So almost paradoxically, in some of these things, you have to create the biggest thing you could do. And then obviously you break it down internally and you do smaller steps to that. But you want to sell the really end stage change and double down on what you believe in. I think you can talk to a lot of investors, a lot of mentors. That's what happens to you as a founder. There's lots of noise and opinions coming at you, but based on your unique kind of experience, you'll know what's best for the company.
I want to know, when it comes to finding your co-founders,
Mm.
I hear this a lot. Having a co-founder is like being married, right? It's a very long process. There's a lot of ups and downs. How you should approach finding a co-founder?
I think it's really difficult. You have to go out and meet a lot of people. I think it's easier to find people that you have worked with in the past that you'd really like, or you enjoyed working with, that you can see a future that you have hope and joy about. So one way is, get yourself into startups, merge your life with startups, see who else is doing the same kind of thing, see who else wants to be a founder, talk to those people around you. And then, I mean, for me and Ravi, especially because we're both the full-time co-founders here, Ravi, I wasn't co-founder from the very beginning. It was very much Ravi's baby from the beginning, which he has the right kind of background technically. He knows a lot about dementia. He's been in the investing background. He's built startups before. So we had to work together for a little bit building this before I became co-founder, actually. So there's a different ways of approaching it. But I think it's always about being clear about what your expectations are and giving people the opportunity to hit them.
A lot of young people, my age and younger, they are moving to San Francisco. They want to move to San Francisco to
Yeah.
start up there. And you mentioned you guys have an office in San Francisco as well. So I'm curious, do you think it is necessary, or do you think you can still build a pretty successful company here based in London?
It depends what you want to be doing. I think what we're doing, it helps to be there because we need a really large amount of money. So I think that is the main driver, right? We want to be bumping into investors in cafes, in the streets, and that just happens in San Francisco. The doors are also much more open to bigger collaborations with other AI companies out there. So we found a lot of value from being there. However, it really depends on the context, right? So if you just want to be a single founder building an app on your own, you can probably do that anywhere in the world on a beach somewhere these days, right? With marketing tools becoming much more easy to use. So for us, it was, thinking about what's best for the company. We need to go super quickly. The mindset of San Francisco is execute fast and be exposed to more of the ecosystem. And that's exactly where people are. So that complements with our London office because we have amazing talent here in London, right? And amazing connections to universities and the NHS. So bringing that back and forth between our offices, really we get the best of both worlds.
This, putting everything into context of what we've talked about, what you guys are going after. If Prima Mente, I mean, not if, when Prima Mente achieve absolute highest ambition and all the things you guys intend to achieve, how does the world change for people, for patients, Sarah?
Yeah, I think hopefully a lot of change. I think we see a similar shift to what we've been seeing in the oncology space or the cancer space. So over the last kind of 20, 30 years, we've seen cancers go from like breast cancer, for example, to like HER2 positive breast cancer. So much more specific breakdowns of disease. And what we're focusing on is that biological and molecular understanding of the brain. Those things have led to better treatment outcomes for patients, catching diseases much earlier. Uh, and basically, I think the very blue sky is deeper knowledge of your brain health when you want it from your home. And we've really switched. Hopefully, the conversation moves from kind of treating patients to improving brain resilience, actually. So, how can we lead a much more healthy life for our brain? And what can we do uh, to protect it in disease, basically? So, that's the kind of world I think about. And ultimately, that leads to us all having more time, being healthy, and enjoying the time that we have here.
And I want to ask you a question. Maybe it's a stupid question, but I'm curious about it because let's say you guys develop this way to diagnose,
Mm,
Alzheimer or dementia way before it happens, right? Very, very precisely. But there's no treatment for it out there.
yeah.
What does patient do? Like, what's the kind of like? I'm just
Yeah.
curious about it.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly the problem why we're going after both the target stuff and the biomarkers, because it is a really hard place to operate in the diagnostic space when you don't have treatment options available. So right now we're trying to understand. There's a lot of other studies that are looking at other kinds of interventions like exercise, diet, etc., that all can support brain health. So bringing those more into our studies as well and educating people on what they can be doing is going to be a big part of this. We're trying to also develop drugs and targets that we can use to treat patients better when we can diagnose them. For now, it's a catch-22 situation. We still have to work on the diagnosis side, even though it's difficult. There are other things that patients can do if they are diagnosed earlier. And at the minute, I think it will be really a patient choice about whether they want to get diagnosed or not in that current kind of environment. But there are some studies like the Fingers study, which is worldwide about showing how communities can come together with exercise, better sleep, and different kinds of interventions that can still support keeping your brain healthy.
Fair. One another thing is, there's for most of the kind of like the pharma focus on
Mm.
Alzheimer disease and Alzheimer research has been on finding ways to get rid of the amyloid plaques, if I'm not mistaken, right? Do you think there needs to be kind of evolution in the field on how they think about Alzheimer's in general, or do you think they need to kind of like let go of the amyloid plaque as an endpoint to go after?
Yeah, I think it's a part of the disease process, which is obviously important to study, but it doesn't seem to be the most effective thing to go after and treat. Apart from when we need to do some more, we still need to do some more studies to understand if it's possible to treat via that method earlier in the disease process. But we believe there's some other things that are happening that we haven't uncovered just yet, and that's where we're focused on.
On a more macro level, I feel like so far most of the AI efforts have been concentrated on finding new drugs, novel drug generation,
Yeah.
rather than novel target discovery, which is something you guys are going after. Why do you think has that's been the case?
So I think it's an easier problem to solve. Um, we have we basically know exactly what you want to drug, and you can create something for that, and it's really exciting actually. That there's lots of progress there, and we actually believe that that will make it much easier to do that in the future. So we're focused on this up to target um, approach so far, and the value of developing a drug will hopefully go down because of that big concentrated effort in kind of developing new drugs. But historically, it seems kind of that we still need to get the right targets, the right biology. So that's where we want to be focused.
Fair. We are coming towards the end of our episode, so I'm going to ask more reflection based questions. I always wonder how the way you think about things and your thoughts, your ideas, perspective shift since the founding the company. So I'm going to ask you this: what's one belief, or perhaps beliefs, you've genuinely changed your mind about since co-founding Prima Mente?
Yeah, I couldn't really think of anything specific about like belief, I guess, just reinforcing some other ones. Like the timing of a company is super key, especially when you need to raise a lot of money. It's important that the world believes in what you're doing. There's other macroeconomic changes that are important, like funding cycles and changes in those kinds of things. And then the other thing I think that I've doubled down on is just that people who self-reflect and have the ability to grow on their own are really valuable members of the team because they can increase their velocity of growth within this kind of community environment when they get lots and lots of feedback. So it's been a joy to grow the company with those kinds of people and do awesome things together.
That's really cool. I asked you quite a few questions, and it's been wonderful hearing your insights, learning from you. Hopefully, you like the questions. But what's a question you wish interviewers asked you?
I did a lot of mentoring before of like you kind of touched on it, the people who are interested in doing PhDs or not sure exactly what they wanted to do. And the one thing those individuals found super useful was when I showed them my calendar. So like actually what happens in my day. So I think people listening to these kinds of things might be interested though to know how my day actually unfolds and what's changed over the last 2 years.
Can I ask you that?
We can try.
So, what's your typical schedule look like? And
Yeah. So there's no typical schedule in a startup world. Interestingly, this week I've had a lot of interviews I'm trying to hire for an operations associate for our London office. I've had to fix the dishwasher. I've had to fix the Wi-Fi and things like that. So mostly it's made up of one-to-ones with our team, doing like urgent tasks and then some space for thinking about the future. But that can get derailed all over the place. When we were first setting up, it was very like operational, very much find an office, find this, get some suppliers, call them up, all of that kind of stuff.
when you're in the early stages of startup, you wear so many hats as a co-founder, and your schedule. You said it's like there's so many things. It's never a typical week. So how do you manage to stay sane and not like balanced and prioritize things? Like what's your I guess advice, or what's your approach to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be them as stable as possible. Anything can hit you at any time. So I think that's always my number one priority, getting enough sleep. I love a good post-it note. So I try to write down the top 3 things I want to do in the day. And then I go through them, scribble them off, and then I have one ready for the next morning when I come in. So I'm super focused. Yeah, I think just spending time with people who make you laugh as well. And hopefully that's the team you work with. But I find that got to have a lot of fun along the way.
Hannah, it's been a wonderful episode. Thank you so much for your insights, for your thoughts, and I'm really excited about Prima Mente and seeing where it goes. Yeah, wish you guys tons of luck and success with everything. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.